The satellite image arrived at Langley at 3:47 inches the morning. An analyst young, sharp 2 years out of Georgetown stared at her screen and felt the blood drain from her face. She picked up the phone, she called her supervisor called his director called the Pentagon, and within 19 minutes a 4-star general was standing in front of a secure terminal in his bathrobe reading the same image on a classified feed. What they were looking at was not a missile, it was not a tank column, it was not a naval flotilla moving through the Strait of Hormuz. It was a runway. A long, wide runway carved into the desert floor of northwestern Iran, near the city of Tabriz. And lined along that runway, wing to wing, covered in camouflage netting but unmistakable to a trained eye, were aircraft. Not fighter jets, not transport planes, drones. 2,000 of them. Flat, angular, low profile, with a wingspan that suggested serious payload capacity and a radar cross-section smaller than a sparrow. The CH-7, China's most advanced stealth unmanned combat aerial vehicle, had just arrived in Iran. Not one or two. Not a test batch of 50. 2,000 units delivered in what American intelligence officials would later describe as the most significant covert arms transfer in the post-Cold War era. By dawn, the Israeli Prime Minister's office had been briefed. By mid-morning, Tel Aviv's civil defense apparatus raised its alert status to level 5, the highest designation in the country's emergency framework, reserved for imminent existential threats. By afternoon, the USS Gerald R Ford carrier strike group had altered course in the Red Sea. The world had just changed, and most people were still asleep. What you are about to hear is not speculation. It is not wargaming. It is a rigorous, evidence-based analysis of one of the most destabilizing weapons transfers in modern military history, and what it means for Israel, for the United States, and for the entire architecture of Middle Eastern security. Today, on the Jiang Report, we are going to cover 5 critical dimensions of this story. First, what exactly is the CH-7? Why is it unlike anything Iran has previously operated? And why does its stealth capability represent a categorical leap beyond anything in Tehran's existing drone inventory? Second, how did this transfer happen? What does it tell us about the depth of the China-Iran strategic partnership? And why did Washington fail to stop it? Third, what does Tel Aviv's Level 5 alert actually mean in operational terms, and how exposed is Israel's layered air defense architecture to a coordinated stealth drone swarm of this scale? Fourth, what is the United States prepared to do? And more importantly, what is it not prepared to do? Given the political and military constraints currently binding American decision makers. And fifth, what does this moment mean for the broader regional order, and are we watching the opening move of something far larger? I am Professor Jiang Xueqin. This is the Jiang Report. Stay with me. Before we go further, if you are watching this and you are not yet subscribed, I want to ask you directly, what are you waiting for? This channel exists for one reason: to give you the kind of serious, unflinching geopolitical analysis that you will not get from cable news, that you will not get from think tanks constrained by donor politics, and that you will not get from governments that have every incentive to manage your perception rather than inform your judgment. Hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and if this video gives you something to think about, share it. Not because I need the metrics, because this conversation needs to happen in public at scale before events overtake our ability to understand them. Now, let us talk about the CH-7. The delivery of 2,000 CH-7 stealth drones from China to Iran did not happen overnight, and it did not happen by accident. Intelligence analysts who have since reconstructed the full logistics timeline, believe this transfer was conceived, planned, and executed across a window of no less than 18 months. It was not a rushed decision made in the heat of a geopolitical moment. It was a deliberate, methodically organized strategic operation, one designed from the outset to remain beneath the threshold of early Western detection, to exploit gaps in the international monitoring architecture, and to present the United States and Israel with a fait accompli rather than a developing situation they could intervene to stop. The physical movement of the drones was structured to defeat surveillance. Rather than a single massive shipment which would have triggered immediate detection by American and Israeli satellite assets, the transfer was broken into dozens of smaller cargo movements, each individually unremarkable, each routed through intermediary nodes that obscured the chain of custody. Overland corridors through Central Asia were used for component shipments. Sea freight moved through Gwadar, the Pakistani deep-water port that China has developed as a critical Belt and Road infrastructure hub, allowing containers to be offloaded far from the scrutiny applied to Gulf shipping lanes. Final assembly of the aircraft was completed at 2 dedicated facilities inside Iran, a primary site near Tabriz in the northwest, chosen for its distance from Israeli strike range during the assembly phase, and a secondary facility near Isfahan in the country's interior, embedded within Iran's existing aerospace industrial complex. The scale of this operation demands clarity on one critical point. The CH-7 is not a commercial product. It is not a dual-use technology that can be acquired through civilian channels or exported under a liberalized trade arrangement. It is a product of the Aviation Industry Corporation of China (AVIC), a fully state-owned enterprise whose senior leadership answers directly to the Central Military Commission of the Chinese Communist Party. A transfer of 2,000 combat-configured units to a foreign power does not pass through AVIC's production lines, does not cross international borders, and does not arrive at Iranian assembly facilities without explicit, high-level authorization from Beijing's most senior decision-makers. This was a state decision. It was made deliberately, and it was made with full awareness of what it would mean. For years, China had maintained a posture of studied ambiguity on the Iran-Israel-US confrontation. Beijing purchased Iranian oil at discounted rates, providing Tehran with the hard currency lifeline that partially offset Western sanctions. It offered political cover at the UN Security Council, vetoing or diluting resolutions that would have tightened the international pressure on Iran. It supplied dual-use technology and civilian infrastructure investment under the framework of the 5-year Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, signed in 2021, a $400 billion commitment that Tehran's leadership had trumpeted as proof that Iran was not isolated, that powerful friends existed, that resistance to American pressure had a future. But through all of this, Beijing had stopped short of direct high-profile offensive weapons transfers. The plausible deniability of dual-use technology allowed China to extract the strategic benefits of the partnership while limiting its exposure to Western backlash. The CH-7 transfer ends that calculation. There is no civilian application for a stealth combat drone delivered in battalion strength. There is no ambiguity about its purpose. Beijing has made a choice, a public, irreversible, strategically consequential choice to arm a state that has declared its intention to destroy Israel and expel American military power from the Middle East. The question serious analysts are asking is not whether this happened. The satellite imagery is unambiguous. The signals intelligence intercepts are corroborating. Multiple independent human intelligence sources have confirmed the transfer through separate channels. The question is why Beijing chose this moment to cross a line it had previously, however cynically, chosen not to cross. 3 converging factors appear to explain the timing. The first is Iran's strategic window. Tehran's military planners have watched the conflict in Gaza with the focused attention of professionals who understand what they are seeing. They have watched Israel's Iron Dome batteries fire thousands of Tamir interceptors, each one a missile that costs $50, 000 to $100, 000 to produce, and that takes time to replace. They have watched the Arrow, 3 systems stressed by previous Iranian ballistic missile exchanges. They have watched Israel's defense industry capable, experienced, world-class, nonetheless strain under the demands of sustained high-intensity interception operations. And they have concluded that the window of Israeli defensive vulnerability, always narrow, is currently as open as it has been in years. This window will not remain open. Interceptor stockpiles will be replenished. New defensive systems will be deployed. But right now, today, the arithmetic of Israeli air defense is less favorable than it has been at any point in the past decade. Iran's planners see that. The CH-7 transfer is designed to exploit it. The second factor is China's own strategic interest in American distraction. Washington's military and political bandwidth is not unlimited. The United States is managing a grinding, attritional war in Ukraine that is consuming American weapons stockpiles and political attention simultaneously. It is managing an accelerating competition with China in the Pacific that demands carrier deployments, alliance management, and defense investment on a scale not seen since the Cold War. A major Middle Eastern crisis, one that forces the United States to deploy additional carrier groups, drain interceptor inventories, manage a panicked Israeli government, and absorb the domestic political costs of another open-ended regional commitment, serves Beijing's interests in ways that transcend the price of 2,000 drones. The CH-7 transfer is not charity. It is an investment in American overextension. The third factor is the internal logic of the China-Iran partnership itself. The 2021 Comprehensive Strategic Partnership generated enormous expectations in Tehran and delivered, in the view of Iran's hardline establishment, underwhelming results in its first years of implementation. Chinese investment moves slowly. Technology transfers remain constrained. The relationship produced diplomatic cover but limited concrete military value. Iran's Revolutionary Guard's leadership grew visibly impatient. The CH-7 transfer is Beijing's most tangible demonstration yet that the partnership has genuine strategic substance, that China is willing to absorb international condemnation, accept the risk of Western sanctions escalation, and deliver real offensive capability to Tehran when the moment demands it. Whatever the precise weighting of these three factors, the outcome is identical. 2,000 of the world's most advanced stealth combat drones now sit on Iranian soil, under Iranian operational command, within unrefueled range of Tel Aviv, of Riyadh, of every American base in the Gulf, and of the carrier strike. Groups that form the backbone of American power projection in the region. The clock is not ticking. It has already started counting down. To understand why the phrase U.S. FRIGHT is not editorial hyperbole, to understand why a four-star general stood in his bathrobe in front of a classified terminal at 4 a.m. and felt something he had not felt in a long time, you need to understand precisely what the CH-7 is, what it is capable of, and why it represents not an incremental improvement over existing Iranian drone systems, but a categorical generational leap that invalidates large portions of the defensive architecture that Israel and the United States have spent billions of dollars and decades of engineering talent building. Start with the design philosophy. The CH-7 is a flying wing. No tail, no vertical stabilizers, no protruding engine nacelles. The entire airframe is a single, continuous, blended surface shaped with one overriding priority: to return as little radar energy to a hostile receiver as physically possible. This is the same design philosophy that produced the American B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, an aircraft that cost $2.1 billion per unit, and that the United States built only 21 of, precisely because the technology required to achieve true low observable performance at that level was so demanding, so expensive, and so difficult to sustain that even the world's wealthiest military could not produce it at scale. China has produced the CH-7 at scale, 2,000 units. That number needs to sit with you for a moment, because it is the number that changes everything. The airframe is constructed primarily from radar-absorbent composite materials, carbon fiber matrices embedded with radar-absorbing particles that convert incoming radar energy into heat rather than reflecting it back toward the source. The engine inlet is carefully shaped and positioned to prevent radar waves from bouncing off the compressor face, historically one of the most significant radar return sources on any jet-powered aircraft. The exhaust is similarly managed, both to reduce radar return and to suppress infrared signature, making the aircraft harder to detect by heat-seeking sensors as well as radar. The cockpit, there is no cockpit because there is no pilot, eliminates another major radar return source that conventional aircraft cannot avoid. The result is a radar cross-section that Western intelligence assessments place between 0.001 and 0.01 square meters. To put that in context, a conventional fighter aircraft has a radar cross-section of approximately 1 to 5 square meters. Iran's own Shahed-136 loitering munition, the drone that has been used extensively in Ukraine and that has appeared in previous Iran-Israel exchange cycles, has an estimated RCS of 0.1 to 0.5 square meters. The CH-7 is between 10 and 500 times harder to detect than the weapon Iran was previously deploying. Against some radar frequencies and geometries, it may be effectively invisible until it is already inside terminal defense range. Now consider the performance envelope. The CH-7's combat radius is estimated at approximately 2,000 kilometers on internal fuel, sufficient to reach Tel Aviv from launch sites in western Iran without forward basing, without aerial refueling, and without any need for the kind of logistical tail that conventional strike missions require. Its cruising altitude is believed to fall between 12,000 and 15000 meters, well above the engagement envelope of shorter-range air defense systems, including Iron Dome, which was designed primarily for low to medium altitude threats. Its cruise speed is estimated at Mach 0.8 to Mach 0.9, with a terminal dash capability that may approach supersonic speeds in the final attack phase, reducing the reaction time available to defensive systems from minutes to seconds. Each CH-7 inches combat configuration is assessed as capable of carrying a payload between 1000 and 1500 kilograms. That payload fraction can be configured in multiple ways depending on the mission profile. Precision-guided munitions, GPS, and inertially guided bombs or standoff missiles represent the baseline strike configuration. But the payload bay can equally accommodate a large unitary penetrating warhead for hardened target attack, a thermobaric weapon for personnel and infrastructure destruction, or most alarmingly, a specialized electromagnetic pulse device capable of disabling electronic infrastructure across a wide area without the physical destruction that would be immediately visible on satellite imagery. That last capability deserves particular attention in the context of Iran's known Fateh-3 EMP development program. If Iran has successfully miniaturized EMP warhead technology to fit within the CH-7's payload envelope, and intelligence assessments suggest this is technically feasible with Chinese assistance, a coordinated first wave of EMP-configured CH-7s could systematically blind Israeli radar installations, disable command and control networks, and degrade the very defensive systems that would be needed to intercept the conventional strike wave that follows. This is not science fiction. This is a textbook application of combined arms, electromagnetic warfare doctrine executed at a scale and with a stealth platform that makes meaningful defense extraordinarily difficult. Now, consider the defensive challenge that 2,000 of these aircraft present simultaneously. Israel's layered air defense architecture is genuinely world-class. Iron Dome handles short-range rockets and artillery. David's Sling engages medium to long-range ballistic missiles and large-caliber rockets. Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 provide theater and exo-atmospheric ballistic missile defense. The F-35I Adir, Israel's indigenous variant of the Joint Strike Fighter, provides the airborne intercept capability that complements the ground-based layers. In combination, this architecture has performed remarkably well against the threat profiles it was designed to face. The CH-7 swarm attacks every assumption built into that architecture simultaneously. Iron Dome's ELM-2084 radar operates primarily in the S-band frequency range, optimized for tracking objects with radar cross-sections well above the CH-7's estimated signature. Against 0.001 to 0.01 square meter targets at 14000 meters altitude, Iron Dome's detection range collapses dramatically from its nominal 70-kilometer detection range against conventional threats to a fraction of that against a genuine stealth platform. By the time Iron Dome's radar achieves reliable track on an incoming CH-7, the aircraft may already be inside the minimum intercept range required for a successful Tamir missile engagement. David's Sling faces a different but equally severe problem. Its Green Pine radar has greater capability against high-altitude targets, but it was designed to track ballistic trajectories, predictable physics-constrained flight paths that fire control computers can extrapolate forward in time. A CH-7 executing terminal maneuvers, banking, diving, jinking under autonomous guidance presents a dynamic targeting solution that stresses the engagement timeline of any ground-based interceptor system. Arrow 3 is simply the wrong weapon for this threat. It was built to intercept ballistic missiles above the atmosphere. A low observable aerodynamic vehicle flying a depressed trajectory inside the atmosphere is outside its designed engagement envelope. That leaves the F-35I. Israel's 36 operational Adirs are equipped with the AN/APG-81 AESA radar, one of the most capable airborne radars in the world, with genuine low observable target detection capability. Against a single CH-7 or a small group, the F-35I represents a credible counter. Against 2,000 simultaneous targets distributed across multiple approach axes, flying at high altitude, executing coordinated swarm tactics, and potentially including decoys designed to saturate the engagement capacity of defending aircraft, 36 fighters are mathematically insufficient. Even flying continuous combat air patrol sorties at maximum sortie rate, Israel's F-35I fleet can engage perhaps 50 to 70 targets per hour under sustained combat conditions. Against the simultaneous launch of 2,000 drones, that intercept rate is strategically irrelevant. The numbers do not lie. They do not offer comfort. They do not suggest a defensive solution that currently exists within Israel's operational inventory. What they suggest instead is that the CH-7 transfer has created a genuine offensive overmatch, a situation in which Iran possesses for the first time in the history of the conflict a strike capability that exceeds the capacity of Israeli defenses to absorb it. Not because Israeli defenses are inadequate by historical standards, but because the CH-7 was specifically engineered to defeat exactly the kind of layered, multi-tier air defense architecture that Israel has built, and China, which has studied that architecture in detail for decades, built the CH-7 with full knowledge of what it needed to defeat. That is not an accident. That is a design specification, and 2,000 of them are now on Iranian runways, fully assembled, awaiting orders. There is a particular kind of dread that settles over a military establishment when it realizes that the tools it has spent decades building, the doctrines it has spent decades refining, and the deterrence architecture it has spent trillions of dollars constructing are being challenged not by a peer competitor with equivalent resources, but by a combination of asymmetric capability and deliberate strategic patience that its existing frameworks were not designed to handle. That dread is currently present in Washington. It is visible in the repositioning of naval assets. It is audible in the carefully hedged language of Pentagon briefings. And it is legible in the gap between the severity of what has just happened and the modesty of the response that the United States government has thus far been able to produce. The State Department's formal protest to Beijing arrived through diplomatic channels within 48 hours of confirmed intelligence on the transfer. Officials described it as delivered in the strongest possible terms, a phrase that, in the vocabulary of American diplomacy, signals maximum rhetorical intensity while committing to minimum concrete consequence. China's foreign ministry response came within 24 hours, a flat denial, an accusation of fabricated pretexts, a restatement of China's commitment to normal commercial relationships with sovereign partners. The exchange was ritual. Both governments understood its meaning precisely. America had registered its objection. China had registered its indifference. Nothing had changed. The military response has been more substantive, but equally revealing in what it communicates about American constraints. The USS Gerald R. Ford Carrier Strike Group has repositioned from the northern Red Sea to a station approximately 200 nautical miles southwest of the Strait of Hormuz. Publicly, the Pentagon described this as a dynamic force posture adjustment, the studied neutrality of institutional language designed to convey readiness without admitting vulnerability. Privately, the reasoning is less ambiguous. The Ford has been moved away from the Iranian coastline, away from the operational radius of 2000 CH-7s flying from Tabriz, away from the engagement envelope that Iran's military planners have spent 18 months quietly preparing. A carrier strike group moving away from a threat is not by itself a sign of weakness. Force protection is a legitimate military priority. But in the context of American strategic communication in the Middle East, where the visible presence of a carrier has for decades served as the primary physical manifestation of American deterrence, the floating embodiment of the message that aggression carries consequences, the Ford's repositioning is a signal. Iran's military leadership will read it. Every Gulf state defense ministry will read it. Every government in the region that is currently recalibrating its strategic alignment will read it. Inside the Pentagon, the conversation that matters most is not about positioning. It is about inventory. The SM-6 missile, the primary long-range air defense weapon aboard American surface combatants, is produced at a rate of approximately 300 to 400 units per year across the entire American defense industrial base. Against a coordinated swarm of 2,000 stealth targets, even assuming intercept engagements begin at maximum range and achieve kill probabilities well above real-world combat norms. The arithmetic of interceptor availability becomes a classified conversation that senior officers are having with visible discomfort. The production lines that supply American air defense simply were not designed to sustain attrition at the rate that a CH-7 swarm engagement would demand. This is the structural problem that the CH-7 transfer has exposed with brutal clarity. American air defense was architected around the assumption that threats would arrive in manageable numbers, that no adversary could simultaneously field hundreds of simultaneous low observable targets against American and allied defensive systems. That assumption was reasonable for 20 years. It is no longer reasonable today. In Washington's policy community, the internal debate has fractured into two camps whose disagreement reflects a deeper uncertainty about American strategic identity in this moment. The first camp, concentrated in the office of the Secretary of Defense and among senior uniformed military leadership, argues for immediate, tangible escalation of support to Israel, additional Patriot batteries, accelerated SM-3 interceptor transfers, pre-authorization of Israeli offensive action against Iranian drone assembly and storage facilities before those facilities can transition from readiness to active launch preparation, and formal designation of the CH-7 transfer as triggering a new severe tier of secondary sanctions against Chinese financial institutions and technology companies, sanctions calibrated to impose costs on Beijing that exceed the strategic value China extracted from arming Tehran. The second camp, concentrated in the National Security Council and the State Department, argues that escalation carries risks that the first camp is systematically underweighting. An Israeli strike on Iranian drone facilities risks Iranian retaliation, not just against Israel, but against American bases across the Gulf. American secondary sanctions against China at the scale required to be meaningful risk, a rupture in bilateral economic relations whose consequences for American financial markets, for global supply chains, for the broader U.S.-China relationship extend far beyond the Middle East. And any action that places American and Chinese military assets in direct confrontation, however indirectly, opens escalation pathways that no one in either government currently has a reliable map for navigating. The president has not yet publicly resolved this debate, but the movement of the forward, the restraint of the State Department's response, and the absence of any pre-authorization communicated to Jerusalem all point in the same direction. For now, caution is the dominant impulse. The danger of that choice is not hypothetical. Every day that Washington deliberates is a day that Iran's 2000 CH-7s move from delivery to operational readiness. The window for deterrence for action that changes Iran's calculation before launch rather than responding to consequences after it is finite. It is measured not in months but in weeks. Washington knows this. The question is whether knowing it is enough to produce the decision that the moment requires. History suggests that the answer, more often than not, is no. Numbers matter. Technology matters. But in the long history of military conflict, they have never been the only things that matter. The will to use a weapon and the will to absorb punishment in defense of what you believe has repeatedly proven to be the decisive variable. On the Iranian side, the CH-7 transfer represents the culmination of a strategic vision that has been building for decades. Since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, the core strategic ambition of Iran's ruling establishment has not changed: to establish Iran as the dominant power in the Middle East, to eliminate the American military presence from the region, and in the language of Iran's most senior leadership, to eliminate the Zionist entity from the map. These are not the statements of a leadership that is bluffing. These are the statements of a leadership that has waited, planned, sacrificed, and built under sanctions, under assassinations, under cyber attacks, under international isolation, toward a strategic end that it has never abandoned. The Revolutionary Guards Corps, which controls Iran's missile and drone programs, has demonstrated over and over again that it is willing to absorb significant costs in pursuit of its objectives. The assassination of General Qasem Soleimani in January 2020 was intended, among other things, to decapitate Iranian strategic planning capability. Instead, it produced a successor leadership that has, if anything, accelerated the pace of weapons development and strategic partnership with China and Russia. The lesson Iran's military establishment appears to have drawn from Soleimani's death is not that the costs of confronting America are too high. It is that the confrontation must be prosecuted with greater speed and with weapons that reduce American ability to respond. The CH-7 is the material expression of that lesson. On the Israeli side, Level 5 alert is not a bureaucratic designation. It activates the full mobilization protocol of the Israel Defense Forces. Reserve units are recalled. Civilian defense shelters are opened and stocked. The Iron Dome batteries are placed on continuous readiness. The Air Force begins sustained combat air patrol cycles. Diplomatic missions abroad are placed on heightened security status. The Home Front Command, Israel's civil defense organization, begins public communications about shelter procedures, emergency supply protocols, and evacuation routes for high-risk population centers. Israel has been here before. Not exactly here. The specific threat profile of 2000 stealth drones is genuinely new. But the existential weight of the moment is not unfamiliar to a country that was founded in the immediate aftermath of the worst genocide in human history, that has fought for its survival in every decade of its existence, and whose political culture is built around the foundational conviction that there is no external guarantor of Jewish safety except Jewish military power. The Israeli defense establishment will not wait passively for 2000 CH-7s to be armed and launched. The question is not whether Israel will act. The question is when, how, and with what. And behind that question lies the deepest geopolitical uncertainty of this moment. If Israel strikes Iranian drone facilities, or if it strikes Chinese military advisors who may be present at those facilities, what does Beijing do? That is the question that is keeping people awake in Washington, and it is the question to which no one currently has a confident answer. Zoom out. Step back from the immediate crisis and look at the larger pattern that the CH-7 transfer reveals. We are living through the end of the unipolar moment. The period between 1991 and roughly 2014, from the collapse of the Soviet Union to Russia's annexation of Crimea, was characterized by the existence of a single dominant power capable of setting and enforcing the rules of international order. That power was the United States. It was not always wise in how it used its dominance. It made catastrophic errors in Iraq and Afghanistan, but its dominance was real. And the existence of that dominance meant that certain categories of action, like a major power transferring thousands of advanced offensive weapons to a state committed to the violent destruction of a neighboring country, carried consequences severe enough to make them vanishingly rare. That era is over. What is replacing it is not a stable multipolar order. It is a transition period characterized by the simultaneous existence of multiple power centers with the capability and the will to challenge American dominance in their respective regions, and with growing capacity to coordinate with each other in doing so. The CH-7 transfer sits at the intersection of three of those power centers. China, the rising challenger, provides the technology. Iran, the regional disruptor, provides the forward deployment and the willingness to use it. Russia, now deeply embedded in a strategic partnership with both China and Iran, forged in the crucible of Western sanctions over Ukraine, provides political cover and increasingly direct military technology transfer of its own. This is not an alliance in the formal treaty sense. There is no signed mutual defense agreement between Beijing, Moscow, and Tehran. But there is a convergence of interests powerful enough to produce coordinated action, as the CH-7 transfer demonstrates, and that convergence is deepening rather than weakening. For the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, the CH-7 transfer is an alarm bell of a different frequency. These are governments that host American military infrastructure, that have built their security architecture on the assumption of American dominance, and that have watched with growing anxiety as Iran's capabilities have expanded and American strategic attention has wandered. The Abraham Accords, which normalized relations between Israel and several Gulf states, were in part a hedging strategy, an attempt to build a regional security architecture that did not depend entirely on Washington's attention span. The CH-7 transfer will accelerate that process. It will also accelerate conversations in Riyadh and Abu Dhabi about whether their own air defense systems, largely American provided, are adequate to the threat that Tehran now represents. In Europe, the response has been muted, which is itself a form of communication. European governments are consumed by the Ukraine conflict, by energy security concerns, by domestic political pressures. They have issued statements of concern about the CH-7 transfer. They have not offered anything concrete. At the United Nations Security Council, China vetoed an American-drafted resolution demanding an international investigation into the arms transfer. Russia abstained. The resolution failed. This, too, is a form of communication. The global picture, then, is one of a world in which the rules that govern arms transfers, deterrence, and regional stability for the past 3 decades are being systematically dismantled, not in a single dramatic moment, but in a series of incremental moves, each of which tests the boundary of what the existing order will tolerate, and each of which, when it produces no decisive response, licenses the next move. The CH-7 transfer is the latest and most significant of those moves. It will not be the last. We began this analysis with a satellite image and a phone call at 3:47 inches the morning. Let me tell you what I think that image represents, not just in military terms, but in historical terms. The transfer of 2000 CH-7 stealth drones from China to Iran is not simply a weapons deal, it is a statement. It is Beijing saying with unmistakable clarity that it has chosen sides in the contest between the existing order and the forces seeking to overturn it. It is Iran saying that its decades of strategic patience are now yielding material returns of the kind that can change the outcome of a conflict. And it is a signal to every other state in the world that is watching, every government weighing its alignment, every military planner updating its threat assessments, that the balance of power in the Middle East has shifted, and that the institutions and alliances that once provided stability are no longer sufficient to guarantee it. What happens next depends on decisions that will be made in the coming days and weeks in Jerusalem, in Washington, in Tehran, and in Beijing. Those decisions are not yet made. The window for deterrence has not yet closed. The possibility of a diplomatic resolution, however narrow, however difficult, has not yet been definitively foreclosed. But time is the one resource that this crisis is consuming faster than any other. Every day that the CH-7s sit on Iranian runways is a day in which they can be armed, programmed, and prepared for launch. Every day that the Israeli government sits at level 5 alert is a day of economic disruption, social stress, and political pressure to act. Every day that Washington debates is a day in which the gap between the urgency of the situation and the pace of the response grows wider. History does not wait for consensus. It moves at the speed of decisions. I am Professor Jiang Xueqin. You have been watching the Jiang Report. If this analysis has added something to your understanding of this crisis, I ask you to do 3 things. Subscribe to this channel so you do not miss what comes next. Share this video with someone who needs to be paying attention, and leave a comment below telling me what question you most want answered in our next report. Because the next report will come. Events are moving, and when they do, you will want to have been paying attention. Stay informed, stay clear-eyed, and whatever comes, stay ready.